The Jets are interesting. They've got $52 million in cap space. They've got some flexibility because Darnold is on his rookie deal. Their draft capital is decent as well. They've got the 11th overall pick, a mid-second rounder, 2 picks early in the third round. So they've got options here, and they definitely are going to bring in a wide receiver. I don't think Robbie Anderson comes back personally. He already came out and said, hey, I'm not giving the Jets a hometown discount. Anytime your number one wide receiver is coming out and saying stuff like that, it's probably not going to mean very much for their ability to get him back. It sounds like his loyalty is kind of gone at this point. Maybe after the experience he had last year with some backup and third-string quarterbacks, he's just ready to go where the money is. So I think Robbie Anderson does leave. And at that point, I think it makes sense for the Jets to actually draft a wide receiver. I don't know if that comes on day 1 or day 2. With that 11th pick, they could pick up Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb, which would obviously be awesome for them. Put one of those guys on the outside with Jamison Crowder running underneath. Like, you've got a real start of a core there with Sam Darnold at quarterback. So I think that's an option. I'm not sold that they're going to do it, though. They've got a lot of holes to fill on the defensive side of the ball as well. So I think they could pick up a guy like Pittman or Justin Jefferson in round 2. Those are guys that are very solid and could blossom into a really good wide receiver. We've seen several wide receivers over the past few years that are day 2 picks pan out. We saw Deebo Samuel in round 2 this past year. Terry McLaurin, I believe, went in round 3, and those guys had big impacts in their rookie season. So I think the Jets probably wait until day 2 of the draft and pick up a rookie. And I could see them going after a smaller name on the free agent list as well. Maybe a guy that's going to be a little bit cheaper, a young guy they can throw some money their way and see if they are going to develop into a true wide receiver 1 or 2, maybe like a DeMarcus Robinson type guy. So, Steph, tell me what you think about those takes.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. If they can't re-sign Robbie, then no question I would go straight to the draft. They have $52 million in cap space, which is 11th, but with just how shallow this free agent class is, I don't think there's a ton of room for them to go out and sign a big name. Maybe they get a more role player type of guy. Maybe they have DeMarcus Robinson, maybe like a kind of a lesser known field stretcher that could come in and kind of replace that Robbie Anderson role. But I love Henry Ruggs for them. He's the field stretcher. He's the Tyreek Hill comp, and a lot of people are saying that he has a more polished route tree than Tyreek Hill did coming out of college with the same level of speed. So I love that as a pick for them. That would be a great fit and kind of take over that Robbie Anderson role. But I do think there is a chance that Robbie Anderson does stay. So let's move over to the Colts here. There's some question marks after T.Y. Hilton, and T.Y. Hilton himself has been hit with the injury bug. The Colts are 4th in the NFL in cap space at $80 million, and they have some decent draft capital. They have a early first-round pick at the 113 spot. They have 2 second-round picks and a early third at the 311. I love the prospect of them taking a second-round wide receiver to come in with, guys like Funchess hitting the road. He's a free agent. Chester Rogers is a free agent. They still have Paris Campbell in that wide receiver room, but grabbing a guy like Justin Jefferson out of LSU, I like Laviska Shenault as a guy who could play a role for them, a big body slot wide receiver that could do a lot for whether it's Jacoby Brissett or another quarterback that they bring in. He'll certainly help. And then T. Higgins is another one I like for them. But Alex, do you think, you're the Colts homer, what do you think they do here? They have all that cap space. They could go sign a big name if they wanted to.
I'll tell you what, sitting here as a Colts fan over the past probably 2 seasons, it's been incredibly frustrating. I trust Chris Ballard. His method has worked, and here we are with a really solid team, a ton of cap space, and a ton of picks. But at some point, you got to say, hey, it's our time and go for it. And I really hope Chris Ballard doesn't sit on this cap space in this draft capital this year without trying to use this championship window. I think if they bring in an upgrade to Jacoby Brissett, that's the number one thing that's going to help the Colts contend this year. And they have to bring in some weapons at the wide receiver position. They just have to. We saw Jacoby get put in a really unfair situation last year with, Chester Rogers being his number 2 receiver, Zach Pascal being his number 1, with some of the injuries and just some of the shallow depth on that Colts team. So I think they have to address the receiver position in the offseason, and I think they're going to do it in a variety of ways. I think they're players for Amari Cooper if he hits the open market. I think they're players for A.J. Green if he hits the open market. And I'd love to see him take a guy with that number 13 pick. I really would. I'd love to see Jerry Jeudy in a Colts uniform. CD Lamb. But I do like some of those day 2 picks as well. I think Chenault's really interesting. A big body guy. We see, Devin Funchess only played 1 game for the Colts last year before his injury, but he's gone as a free agent. Eric Ebron is going to leave as a free agent. So really your only red zone threats right now are, I guess, Jack Doyle and Zach Pascal. So you really want to go get a big body guy. I think that can make sense, but I think they're going to do this in a variety of ways, and I would not be surprised to see them bring in a free agent. Maybe it's one of the top tier guys. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a guy in the middle. But then I think they're going to draft some guys at their receiver position as well. So I'm really excited to see what they do at the position. It's a position of need, and it's one of my favorite positions on the football field. So it's going to be really fun to see if we can bring in some playmakers. Maybe it's for Jacoby Brissett. Maybe it's for another quarterback. We'll see.
There's 2 free agent names I want to throw out there. They're kind of gross, but I just want to see what your perception is on them. What do you think about a 33-year-old Emmanuel Sanders?
I'm not really a fan of that move. I think they're going to have to pay him a little bit more money than some of these other guys, and he had some flashes last year. He had some huge games. He's just getting older, though, and this is a Colts team that's pretty young. And, I just don't know, unless you're going to bring in Emmanuel Sanders and really sell out with some of that other cap space and sign veterans on defense and bring in guys that are going to make an impact day 1 in the draft. I just don't know what sense it makes to bring in Emmanuel Sanders. I would much rather go after a guy, like a Robbie Anderson or this. I mean, I don't really believe in Brashad Perriman's talent that much, but if the money is similar, I'd much rather sign a guy like Brashad Perriman. He was a first-round draft pick just a few years ago. I believe he's 26 years old, and he showed some real signs last year that he can get it done when he was running as the number 1 receiver for the Bucs. So I would much rather get a guy like that than a guy like Emmanuel Sanders. I'm not hating on Emmanuel Sanders' talent at all. I think he's going to have a big role for a contender next year. I actually have him for some of these teams we're going to talk about as a top target, but I just don't know if it makes sense for the Colts.
So throwing out another name, and I totally get your point on Sanders. I don't know, that Colts offense is kind of rebuilding, but I feel like they're kind of in win now mode. Like you were saying, if Ballard wants to go all in, I feel like he could get them there. They're right at, they just need to get over that hump. I thought Sanders would be a guy that could give a small veteran deal to, come in, bring some leadership to that locker room. So that's why I threw him out there.
Yeah,
but I want to throw another one.
In the NFL, it's just so hard to keep the status quo for several years in a row. Look at the Rams this past year. They're a perfect example. They are taking the league by storm. The second season of this incredible Sean McVay offense, they make it to the Super Bowl. And then last year they just come out and it's a total dud. And they didn't have an insane amount of turnover. I know their line got worse significantly on offense, but the playmakers are the same. A lot of those pieces on defense are the same. It's just so hard to keep the status quo for several seasons in a row in the NFL. So if you're the Colts, you can't just say, hey, we're going to keep this nucleus together and try to build it one piece at a time, build it out. At some point, you got to put the pedal to the metal. So enough on the Colts. We can go ahead and move on now. Just wanted to throw that last point out there.
No, I love it. I love it. There's certainly a lot of options that they could go with that could all pan out. So the next one here, talking about the Raiders. Right now they have Tyrell Williams, Hunter Renfrow, and I believe Zay Jones is a free agent. He's still there as well. They have $50 million in cap space, which is about middle. They're 15th in the NFL, but they have a ton of draft capital. They have the 12th overall pick, the 19th overall pick. They have 3 third-round picks, so they could wait and get a wide receiver. We talk about how deep this wide receiver draft class is. They could pick up a fantastic talent at the 316 if they wanted to and kind of wait for the draft to come to them. I also love Jerry Jeudy as a first round pick for them here. Give them a true wide receiver 1. The comp for Jeudy has been Devontae Adams, and that's what the Raiders need, right? This death by 1,000 cuts offense that they run, the Gruden grinders, handing it off to Josh Jacobs on first and second down, and then being efficient on third down with Derek Carr, or maybe somebody else that they bring in. That's another question mark. But what do you think the Raiders do here? They really need a wide receiver 1 that can take over, especially in the red zone and deep downfield.
Yeah, I think they are locked in for a wide receiver in the offseason. I think they actually have a very similar situation to the Colts. They have cap space, they have draft capital, and they have a glaring need at wide receiver. And it's interesting you say Jerry Jeudy was a comp to Devontae Adams. I know Jeudy is a lot smaller, So I could see them bringing in a guy like Jerry Jeudy, though. I mean, I think of him kind of like a Stephon Diggs, very polished routes, very smooth, has got some speed. And I think they have a Antonio Brown-sized hole in that offense at that wide receiver one spot. So I think the Raiders are in play for the top-tier guys. I think Tyrell Williams is a solid wide receiver two in the NFL. He's not a wide receiver one. Hunter Renfrow is a great slot guy. We saw him come on strong last year. Darren Waller's great underneath. But I think they could go out and be a player for some of these top names. I think I'm concerned as a Colts fan at the 13th overall pick that the Raiders are going to take our guy at 12th if it's going to be a wide receiver. I think they're in play for Jeudy. I think they're in play for CeeDee Lamb. And I also think they're in play for some of these free agents. Maybe they'll go out and get an A.J. Green to headline Las Vegas. Maybe they wouldn't this be interesting? They go out and sign Amari Cooper back. That would be the swindle of the century, getting one of these getting a first round pick from the Cowboys, giving them a little loan, a season and a half of Amari Cooper, and getting them right back. That would be really interesting. I don't even know if he'd be interested in going back, but I think they are in a desperate need for a number one wide receiver, and it's going to come. So I don't necessarily think they're in play for a guy like Robbie Anderson. He's too similar to Tyrell Williams in my mind. But I do think whether it's A.J. Green, Amari Cooper's a bit of a stretch, but maybe that number 12 pick, they're going to get a wide receiver. And I think it's going to be a top-tier guy that they want to have as their wide receiver one for now and into the future.
It feels like Tyrell Williams could be a serviceable two. Hunter Renfrow had his moments. He's a receiving receptions monster down there in the slot. I want to play a little what if scenario with you, Alex. The Oakland Raiders, we saw them as potentially a wild card contender for a little bit of this year.
The Vegas Raiders.
The now Vegas Raiders, my apologies. Yes. But if they had Antonio Brown there, they went 7-9 in the regular season. They're fighting in a tough division with the Chiefs. Where do you think they could have been if Antonio Brown would have panned out for them? You think they would have gone over the hunt and been in the wild card race?
Yeah, I'll tell you, my fantasy team certainly would have finished higher. But I think they would have been right there. I mean, given the circumstances they were in, AB is gone before the first game. One of their first-round picks, Jonathan Abram, if you watched Hard Knocks, you saw how well he was playing in camp. And then even in that first game of the regular season against Denver, he had a really strong game. He goes out after the first game for the season. So you look at those two things combined and then, just how well the Raiders really came together and truly grinded for the regular season. And you got to think they would have made a run. They were 7-9. They're just a couple of games out for that wild card spot. I really do think they're a wide receiver one away from being a contender. I think Derek Carr's fine. I think he's a good enough quarterback to at least get them into the playoffs. I don't know if he's a Super Bowl type guy. There's always the rumors about Derek Carr getting traded or then bringing in competition or something like that. But just with the draft class they had last year on both sides of the ball, we saw Josh Jacobs be awesome. Hunter Renfrow, we just mentioned. Then on the defensive side, Cleveland Farrell had a decent rookie season. He didn't quite live up to that number 4 overall pick in year one. But then Max Crosby on the other side for the pass rush was incredible. We just mentioned Jonathan Abram. He's going to be back at safety this year. They have 2 more first-round picks and 3 picks in the third round. So the Raiders, watch out for the Raiders. If they go out and sign a top wide receiver and spend some of that money on maybe some holes on the line or the defensive side of the ball, and then they use this draft capital well, they are going to be a force next season. So I think they probably would have finished 8-8 or 9-7 last year. I think they would have been right on the cusp of that wild card spot, but maybe things would have been a lot different if they would have gotten in the playoffs instead of the Titans. So you can always play the what if game, but yeah, I think that void is real, and I think that is definitely one of the reasons that their offense wasn't really able to open up to its full potential in 2019.